Well, I think it's 7 o'clock, so we'll get started. This is our first seminar, so hopefully we'll have this in our minds. There's one in 2 weeks, which is on,
Tim Bennett's going to
Tim
talk about
Bennett.
Civil War reenactment.
and then 2 more weeks, and it's Dan Delegati talking about McDonald's. So tonight we have Susan Boland from George Jr. Republic. We are very familiar with George Jr. here at the Historical Society because we found out about the Barge Boys. Now, Barge stands for Behavior and Restorative Justice. And these young men, as part of their sentence, have to do community service. And if we need things moved or work done, we call the Barge Boys. And they are wonderful, and they like being here, they like our ghost stories, and we have a good time with them. So we're very familiar with George Jr. Susan has been at George Jr. since 2013. She's responsible for grant writing and management, public relations, events development, management, and organizational development. So she has lots of titles. She also is a Rotarian, and that's how I met Susan. We're both in the Rotary Club, and I'll put in a plug. Any of you who are interested in community service, Saturday at 9 o'clock, we're having a work day out at the park at the Memorial Garden. Come with shovels and spades. We have 20 trees to plant. We have 30 bushes to plant. We're going out into the mine hills and digging up ferns, and we have permission to do it, so we won't get arrested. So if you want to help with the community project, come join Susan and me. We'll be out there working. So that's our latest project. So Susan's going to talk to us about the history of George Jr. and tell us where they've been, where they are, and maybe where they're going.
So it's great to see everyone, and I'm sure you folks know much more about George Jr. Republic than I do. So I entitled my speech A Brief History because we go back to the late 1800s, so I'm not going to take you back that far. But when people ask about George Jr. Republic, I always go back to 1909 when we were established. So if you bear with me, I want to share some information about our early years, and then I'll tell you more what's happening today. So, and I have some books in different archives, and I know the gentleman in the front row brought some archives as well, and I'm so thankful that the Historical Society has information about George Jr. here as well. Let me just preface this by stating, if anyone's ever interested in coming out for a tour, if you just let me know, Skip has my contact information. We would love to have you come out. We're on 500 acres, obviously, but we're like our own little community out at George Jr. Republic. In addition to that, and interestingly, and I guess if I was thinking with a clearer head, when Skip invited me out here, I would have invited you all to come to George Jr. Republic because we have our own history room on campus. So, and our history really walks you through all of the history of George Jr. Republic as well. And we have our own money in different things, different awards and things that we received over the course of time. So if anyone's ever interested in that, please let Skip know and she can contact me. So, I apologize for that. So with that, let's go back to the early years. So how many people know that there's multiple George Jr. Republics across the United States? Did anyone? Okay, so a few people. So if we go back in the history of time, George Jr. Republic was originally founded in 1895 by William Reuben George, and he established actually the first Junior Republic in Freeville, New York. But at that same time, there were junior republics established in Readington, Pennsylvania, in Annapolis, Maryland, Connecticut, California. There was the George Jr. Republic of Western Pennsylvania here in Grove City, Flemington, New Jersey, Moorestown, New Jersey, and Dorset, England. So there were many, many, many George Jr. Republics established, and really William Reuben George, his idea, and if you read all of his writings, his idea was to take young individuals from the slums, specifically in the slums in New York City, and give them a fresh air, put them on fresh air camps so that they could learn how to become a self-sustaining, productive citizen in the United States. So if you go back, through the writings of the George Junior Republic and you look at what he says in any of his documents, what he really talks about is there was nothing without labor. So his thought is if you're living in the slums of New York City and maybe you're getting into a little bit of trouble, and of course the trouble back then and the trouble that occurs now, they're really. But really his thought is if we could take these young people and bring them to Grove City or these other fresh air camps, we would really give them a second chance. And with that being stated as well, he was very much interested in a society which was self-governing. So I don't know how many of you would trust young people today to run the self-governing society. Probably I see the people chuckling, and I have a teenager in my household too, so I wouldn't want him running the government yet. But with that, so that was really the start. The idea was let's give these individuals really a chance. And many people don't realize that we used to have girls at George Junior Republic. We no longer have girls, and that will cause some issues, I'm certain. But the Junior Republics that were established, they had girls when they were originally established. And it was really based on the system of student self-government, because he believed if you could teach young people how to be good citizens, really they would be set up for a pathway for success. So, of course, the points of interest are William Reuben George. There were multiple Junior Republics. The closest does remain in New York. So last summer, and this is a little bit of a point of interest, if you're interested in the history of George Junior Republic, if you go to Ithaca, New York and visit Cornell University, they have as part of their archives the history of William Reuben George. And they have a huge archive of Mr. George, and if you call in advance, you can see his memorabilia. But the Junior Republic in Freeville, New York remains. Now what I will tell you is when I drove from Cornell University to Freeville, New York, and here is this quote-unquote campus that's out frankly in the middle of nowhere, and it's these beautiful rolling hills. It really looks like maybe the last time they had a renovation was maybe in 1960. So I was shocked to see really the surroundings where the students live. And most of the structure that they have in Freeville, New York is based on the fact that it's counselor parents with children. So I'll tell you a little bit about our changing environment here in Grove City. But that's really the early years of George Junior Republic. So, and at that time, and as I walk through the history, it was common for the Junior Republics to be managed by superintendents. And of course, organizational structures changed, nonprofits changed, but historically, all the Junior Republics were run by these quote-unquote superintendents, and which really lends to the fact that it was really something that we were looking at the behavior of students, how these students could become good citizens, but also education was always tied into that. Let me see. So William Reuben George was a jewelry case maker, and in addition to that, he was also a businessman. And his heart was really just vested in young individuals. So in 1907, Dr. Morgan Barnes, who was a Mercer County native and educator, he recommended that Grove City become a possible site for Mr. George's dream. And during the course of the 1900s, Dr. Barnes was very much involved in the Junior Republic. So we have these, and I don't know how many individuals through your families, etc., knew Mr. or Dr. Barnes, but we found these pictures here in our basement of Dr. Barnes, and we had several buildings early on at George Junior named after Dr. Barnes. So we have just Dr. Barnes giving speeches. We have all sorts of pictures of Dr. Barnes, just very interesting. But with that, I share with you information about Dr. Barnes, but some of the early administrators of the Junior Republic. This was actually a postcard picture that was taken many, many years ago. There were no names on the back. I'm not certain who these gentlemen were at the time. Obviously, they looked like they were very important based on their dress and different things. But those were some of the early administrators of George Junior Republic. Now with that, when you look at this slide, I'm just going to take some time to read a passage out of this book, which is a history of George Junior Republic, and it states that Mr. George believed that all boys and girls would derive benefit from spending a few years in a village in which the government was conducted by themselves, and there were the conditions, economic, civic, social, where in which they were the same as an ordinary village. His chief interest was to develop the character of young people. He did not aim to change society, but to fit young people into the economic and political institutions of the United States. He theorized that when a citizen had property earned by himself, he would want laws to protect it and would be interested in government. So it's interesting just really what he was thinking, and it makes sense. It makes sense at the time, and I think in some ways it makes sense today as we continue to teach young people really what they need to know. And let me just move ahead to present day. Currently, George Junior Republic, the students that come there, it's really based on a level system. You earn additional privileges, et cetera, and there's different units based on your behavioral needs. So we still carry on with some of the vision of Mr. George, although we're not, the students are not self-governing. So many people know, and it's interesting, so when we have graduates of George Junior Republic come back to George Junior, they'll talk about so much farming that occurred in the early years of George Junior Republic. So I don't know how many people in this room know Mr. Tushy. So everybody's shaking their head, right? So I'll give you a funny story about Mr. Tushy. So I was informed when I started George Junior Republic that Mr. Tushy was going to come to meet with me, and he's a colonel. So Mr. Tushy comes in, you know, he's a strong, strapping man, right? I believe that the whole time he was speaking to me, I did not slouch once as I was sitting and talking to him in my chair, because I was like, this gentleman's a colonel. But he even, if you talk to Mr. Tushy and hear stories, and I think many individuals know where County Market is now located. We used to have potato fields, so it was common for the boys to have to go out and dig up the potatoes, although he shared the story that many times the young men would put rocks in their bags because they thought that was funny. Of course, who wants to dig up potatoes? But this is an interesting picture, just our early years and some of our citizens. It looks like hard labor, and that's something else that wouldn't be allowed in today's society, but making good citizens in terms of collecting hay. So in June 1909, Mr. George, also known as Daddy George, and I think it's interesting how the nomenclature has changed and how staff members were referred to at George Junior Republic. I know going back in time when we have individuals that graduated from George Junior, they'll say, oh, I used to be in the cottage of Aunt and Uncle so-and-so. I didn't have time because there's so much to go through this evening, but if you're interested and you want to come to George Junior, we found old movie reels, and it's interesting watching these young men come in, I don't know, a Studebaker, I don't know what kind of vehicle it is. They're in their suits and ties, they're coming to George Junior, and there's a few scenes where the young men, they're distraught about something and they're sitting on someone's lap and they're being consoled. Now in this day and age, you are not, that's wrong, but you know, we all know that children need some, you know, tender, loving care, so it's interesting how things have changed over the course of time. So in July 1909, apparently the Grove City community rallies together to back Mr. George, and he purchases the John McCain farm. Now, what I think is very interesting, I wasn't able to find anything whereby the community of Grove City looked unfavorably on George Junior Republic, and I wonder today in my position, because I interface with so many people, if George Junior wasn't here and we were going to bring a new George Junior to Grove City, would people be accepting of that? So I always think about that. But apparently through all my reading, it appears that the community really embraced this, and the community helped raise funds for what was established as George Junior Republic. So again, we have some very old pictures. There's some of our young men out with the horses and the cows, and I know one of the gentlemen that came back that had graduated years and years ago, I think the man was in his 80s, he remembers when one of his buddies lit the hay on fire and the barn burned to the ground, and of course, you know, they ran away or something. But so there again, just very interesting as it relates to the community and how they really embraced the Junior Republic. So again, this is one of our earliest pictures of our early citizens. They look like very happy young men, especially this guy. I don't know, he looked like he was having a bad day. But so It's interesting, again, over the course of time, why the young men were at George Junior Republic. These children were really in the slums of New York City. And as you look at George Junior Republic today, I'll tell you, Skip mentioned, adjudicated young men, but we're seeing a drastic increase in rise of children that have been neglected and abused. So our population of adjudicated youth is actually decreasing as we're seeing more children come to us that have no families. Their families are incarcerated, they have been neglected or significantly abused. And when I look at this picture, I'm sure there's some commonalities with the young people in this picture as well as the students we're currently serving. So December 1909, so again within the same time period, Mr. Daddy George delivers his inaugural speech, fulfilling his dream of serving the youth who need a helping hand. And what he called George Junior Republic in Pennsylvania was a village like no other, because it was so many acres. It was really a fresh air environment. Looking at and going to visit the George Junior Republic in Freeville, New York, it's really a smaller campus. There's more rolling hills. It's a smaller campus. There's another George Junior Republic left in Chino, California. That to me just looks like you're in the middle of a city. And of course the population there is a bit different, but we were just ever so, I guess Grove City and the students that were our earliest residents were just so lucky to come to this village like no other. And I think if you look at even the Grove City community welcoming these students to this new fresh air camp, I could see why he makes reference of that. The one thing I'll just point out in these pictures, obviously this wouldn't pass any kind of inspection now with 2 and 3 different floors and stairs up and down. But for those of you that knew individuals that worked at George Junior many, many, many years ago, it was common to have a floor walker, so there would be one young person assigned to keep watch at night. So maybe you would have 30 young men on one floor and one boy that had to stay up all night and keep peace and order. In today's world, that would not work, but that was really their job. In addition to that, we had these young women here. I'm assuming that they were probably some of the ladies that worked at George Junior Republic, and the women were always charged with cooking and cleaning and teaching the young men how to learn how to keep a nice home. So that's some highlights from that picture. As we move forward, though, the fresh start, we're cultivating a fresh start, and in 1910 is the first spring at George Junior Republic, and we have 80 acres of newly cultivated land. They had an apple orchard, a garden, all sown by the hands of youth and staff. So interestingly, we're looking at going back to some of those things, because we know that if you have your hands in the dirt, it just really releases so much untapped energy and potential. It's nice for the young men to grow things of their own. So this is just some early days. Working in a carpentry shop. This is a home where some of the students lived, and then we even had a bakery on campus, which I think is interesting. So individuals, young guys learning how to learning various trades, So again, this really works towards the self-sustaining community that Mr. George wanted to create. And in 1919, the Tassie Domestic Science House is established for the girls of George Junior Republic. So this teaches young ladies how to establish themselves in a home. So I'm not certain, I think I have a future slide when the young ladies were no longer on the campus, but I can only imagine the trials and tribulations that were brought with some young women coming to campus. But again, the thought was to remove these young ladies from the slums of New York City and bring them to this fresh air camp. We have very little information on the young ladies that were at George Junior Republic. So here again is another picture of George Junior Republic. Again, just pay attention to, like, this home looks like it has 3, maybe more than 3 floors. But managing a home of children with 1 staff, with 2 staff, maybe with a married couple, I think that would be very hard to manage, but that's what Daddy George intended. So this is William Reuben George. I have his picture in my office for a long time, and I did pass it on to Cornell University. It's very hard to see the writing, but again, these are some of the young men that were at early on at George Junior Republic. And when you look at the self-sustaining community that we had our own money. So again, I'd invite you, if you're interested in seeing some of the money that we had. The money was printed on campus, at campus, and then the students could buy cigarettes with their money, which I thought was interesting and not a good idea. But the students could basically, they were learning how to be self-sustaining. As you look at the young people that we have coming today, it's almost like we need to start teaching the same skills. We're teaching a lot about life skills. How do you manage money? How do you use money? What's appropriate ways to spend money, etc. So we do have several dollar bills. I think we even have a pack of cigarettes that was located at one point in time. So education is the key. So in 1921, the Junior Republic is formally recognized and eligible for educational appropriations thanks to the Pine Township School District. And of course, that's changed along the way. And education was in very strong demand in the early 1900s, and it's in strong demand today as well. Most of the students that we work with today are typically 3 or more grade levels behind. My first year at George Junior Republic, so I'm a native of Pittsburgh, but I would drive past George Junior Republic and I thought, oh, well, maybe that's a retirement community. I wasn't really certain what that was, what George Junior was at the time. But what I will tell you is many of the students come to George Junior and they come to us because the judge orders that they be placed there because they're so far behind academically. So one of my first years, one of the reading teachers had a program and the kids were reading Clifford the Big Red Dog. Well, I have a child. My son read Clifford the Big Red Dog when he was just a little tyke, and here you have 18-year-olds learning for the first time to read Clifford the Big Red Dog. And I think it's probably the same thing that was highlighted in the early 1920s. So we're not certain, and when I go back in our archives, and I'm certain that the school district probably has archives, we're not certain when a formal relationship established with the Grove City Area School District. We know it was discussed in Daddy George's archives, but we're not certain. We don't have a formal document at George Junior as it relates to this partnership. Education, though, remains to be a key, and youth are behind academically, and they have a special needs, obviously, for special education. Currently on our campus, just so you're aware, although we're on 500 acres, we have an academic center. The academic center is named after Judge Maurice Cohill, who was a longtime federal judge in Pittsburgh, and Maurice Cohill established the National Center for NCCJ, National Center for, I think it's NCJJ, National Center for Juvenile Justice, and their home office is in Pittsburgh. But Maurice Cohill wanted young individuals that were involved in juvenile justice to really have a home for education. So we did a renovation on campus, and the academic center was dedicated in 2011. In addition to that, and I'll talk a little bit about this a few slides down, but we have a vocational school on our campus as well, and that was renovated in 2013. And really the thought is, how can we teach youth about the skilled trades, and how can we provide with them education? Currently on our campus, we have a little over 90 teachers on our campus that are teachers of Grove City Area School District. So in 1936, the youth and staff at the Junior Republic are saddened by the news that William Reuben George has passed away, and he died at the age of 69. And in 1938, we transitioned to male only. But as I mentioned, there's very few documents as it relates to how did that work with the girls and the boys living on the same campus. Based on our estimates, though, since 1909, we estimate that over the course of all of these years, we've served about 68,000 youth. We really have a vested interest currently in looking for alumni, those that graduated from George Junior Republic. So if you know of someone, I know there's a few individuals that live here in Grove City, because every so often they'll stop by and see me. So please refer them to me. So over the course of time, originally we were taking students primarily from New York City, but over the course of time we've served students from Pennsylvania, Ohio, California, West Virginia, Connecticut, Michigan, as far away as Bermuda. I was hoping someone would call me from Bermuda to present on the history of George Junior Republic. We have students within the next month or so that will start to come to us from Maryland, and we have many county-based contracts. So the reason a student would be placed at George Junior Republic is really the scope of services and what we have to offer. Sometimes the legal system really recommends that students leave their home community. If you can think about drug addiction and different things, challenges in the communities, that's some of the reasons why they'll come to George Junior. Academics, of course, and learning a skilled trade is a big component of that. So in 1940, Arthur T. Prassey becomes the superintendent of the Junior Republic. And again, I just italicized superintendent because nowadays that's old nomenclature. When he arrives, and I think this is interesting, this is why I wanted to point out, when he arrives on the grounds, there was no comforts to offer the boys, including heat and food. And this is in relationship to the tough economic times. So if you read what was happening in the world and also at George Junior Republic, I can't imagine, we're going to provide you this fresh air camp. It's going to be great, but we have no food and we have no heat, so, good luck. But Mr. Prassey completely reorganized the structure of campus so that it could thrive again. And this book is a little bit before Arthur Prassey, but if you have time afterwards and you want to take a look at some pictures in terms of young men working in the fields and doing what they needed to do to help support the society of George Junior Republic. So in 1944, at that time, if you think of the conflict that the United States was in, really up to present day, we've had a number of young men leave campus and go off to join the military. So as many of you may be aware, we have an annual Veterans Day celebration on our campus, and it's really in honor of all those young guys that left George Junior Republic to serve. But one individual was Private Donald Lobaugh, and he was a former Junior Republic citizen, and he was killed in action in New Guinea. And he was awarded the Medal of Honor. So we actually have his Medal of Honor at George Junior Republic. We have his picture, and he would write to the superintendent at that time, and he called him Daddy. So it's interesting because Mr. Lobaugh had no one else in his family, so we want to recognize him, and then all the other students that bravely gave their lives. So in 1945, the estimate is that we had lost over 200 young men that went off to serve the country. And I know since that time, every year, I guess since I started at George Junior, we have about 10 young men that graduate and go on to serve in the military. So we want to make sure we recognize those gentlemen. So in 1948, the Lobaugh Memorial Auditorium is dedicated in his honor. And there again, just a few pictures. We try and recognize our veterans every year. So in 1952, and I won't spend too much time, I could talk forever, but 1952 there was a building dedicated from Arthur Prassey, and in 1955, in honor of the William Reuben George, the Junior Republic officially changes its name to George Junior Republic Association of Western Pennsylvania. And that was changed because of the changing times in terms of the structure of the organization. And then in 1958, Memorial Hall was dedicated. So this, from all estimation, I believe is Memorial Hall. So there again, Memorial Hall was a place where the young guys would live, and then they would reside on the second and third floor. They had young men in the evening called floor walkers. They shared the responsibilities. There was typically one young woman that resided at the building that was charged with really meeting the motherly needs of the students at George Junior Republic. This picture is after 1958, but lots of photos to share. So in 1963, Morgan Barnes passed away. I'm not 100% certain where he is buried.
Woodland Cemetery. Woodland Cemetery.
Okay, well, thank you. See,
He was in our cemetery walk we had last July. He was
okay.
one of our-
See, See, I learned something new, so I'll have to make sure I mention that. But we found this old picture, but now I can go take a new picture. And thank you. So in 1967, the new administration building was built at that time. And the administration building, if you are on George Junior Road, it's the red brick building that sits closest to the road. You'll see that right down from the chapel. And then in 1968, we're employing about 180 staff members. Today we have about 820 staff members, and I'll explain that. But the youth at that time, they continued to spend time caring for the land, showing cows, and all of these wonderful things that they could become good citizens. One thing I will say as well, and I'll just point a few things out, and I didn't bring a picture of campus today because you folks see that, but it was interesting if you look at the aerial views over the course of time and how we really went from having a very rural look to more of a small community college campus. This picture specifically has very few to none to no buildings, in it. And that looks like that was taken maybe over at Lakeside, which is really across the road down the lane. So. In 1969, after 2 decades of service, so we had a transition from Prassy, and then William Gladden served as superintendent. William Gladden, if you look back at the archives of the Junior Republic, and I don't know if I brought any pictures, but William Gladden was really a strong figurehead for the organization for many, many years. So he retired, and then his son, William H. Gladden, took over. And that, I think, is something unheard of today, right? We have someone retires and their son typically doesn't take over. But William H. Gladden was very much focused in career and the career in tech or vocational training for the young men. And so his legacy to George Junior Republic was really looking at the skilled trades. So if you read the archives of William Gladden, he speaks eloquently about the need for youth to learn a trade, and so that they could go directly out into the workforce. So about 3 years ago, we actually renovated our vocational school, and now we call it the Career and Technical Center. And I know many of you here in this room know Betsy Hackett, right? Betsy's son actually came back for the dedication of the Career and Technical Center. It was really a great day, but there again, it was a nice way to commemorate William H. Gladden, and really his legacy continues on today as we try and promote the skilled trades. And as many of you know, in 1974, unfortunately, William Gladden was killed on a trip to Harrisburg, and he was really on his way to Harrisburg to secure money for the vocational school. And I think those that come back to visit George Junior Republic, they wonder, is William Gladden still alive? And they're really shocked. They're shocked of his passing. So it's just interesting the impact that the Gladdens had as well to our citizens at George Junior Republic. So this picture here is Pappy Gladden, and most pictures that we have on campus show Pappy Gladden with just boys around him, and everyone seems to be smiling. And he always seems like he's touching. He always had his hands on the boys in a positive way. So I won't go too much into this, but I do want to point out, so these are two of our graduates, George Junior Republic. This gentleman actually works at George Junior Republic now. He was our graduation speaker a few years ago, and I won't share names, but when he was a young guy, and I think he's about 50 years old now, when he was a young man, he was at George Junior Republic. This gentleman, interestingly, and if you talk to individuals that graduated from George Junior or were placed at George Junior many years ago, what they'll say is they really like to just cause a little bit of trouble, right? We know how men are. So we would hear stories like, well, you know what, my father was a police officer. But I could get into his police car, and I always wanted to see how things worked, and I wanted to see if I could hotwire a vehicle and all of these things, right? They're just getting into a little bit of trouble. But people look favorably. This gentleman, after all of the years, he still had his Grove City Area School District George Junior diploma. And many individuals leave George Junior Republic and they're rather successful, but they really don't want to tell anyone that they were at George Junior Republic. So a story, I was actually down in Fox Chapel at a Rotary meeting giving a presentation about George Junior Republic, and a lady raised her hand and she said, you know what, one of my good friends told me he was at George Junior Republic when he was little, and he said it was a private school for boys. So I thought that meant that, his family was very affluent, and that's not, of course, the case. But we do have individuals that have been at George Junior, obviously, and have become very successful. This gentleman is a business owner out across the state of Pennsylvania. We have another individual that's an attorney and a banker. He lives in Manhattan, New York City, and he sends us a nice donation every year. But he was a student at George Junior Republic. To go back, I guess, along our story, though, when George Junior Republic was established, there were large homes, and then there were these aunts and uncles that took care of the boys, and then from that really sparked this counselor-parent model. And we still have counselor-parents at George Junior Republic. So it's married couples raising their own children, and then they have about 10 to 12 boys in their home. A job I could never do because I raised my voice too much. But with that being stated, what I will tell you about the counselor parents, and something that I thought was very interesting, those people really feel like it's a mission in their heart to really help these young individuals. So just be aware that still occurs, although we have more and more buildings where we just have shift workers and different things. And during the late 1970s, early 80s, we were having more and more students that were representative of the juvenile justice community. So based on this ever-increasing population, we had a new recreation center established in 1980. Of course, when you have so many boys on campus, so at one point 2 years ago, we had about 520 boys on campus. We need a lot of activities because boys need to run and get rid of all that energy. Also during that time, we expanded the DeBarn School. And just for your information, I thought this was important to point out. If a judge or a county places a boy at George Junior Republic, the first thing they do when they come to campus is they receive a plethora of assessments. Academic assessments, we want to see where their reading skills are, their math skills are. We want to see if they have any psychological problems, just really what are their unmet needs. So they're assessed and they go to a diagnostic center before they go out and are placed in one of the buildings on our campus. So in 1988, and I know probably everyone in this room knew Nanny Jean, God rest her soul. So Nanny Jean was such a lovely person. In 1988, Nanny Jean established the George Junior Republic Scholarship Program, and it was really in her heart to establish this program so that young men could go off to college if that was really what was in their heart, and if they had the academic ability. Oh goodness, I apologize. If they had the academic ability to do that. So we did name a building after Nanny Jean, but in 1988 we established the scholarship program. And our estimates up through this year, we estimate we've paid over $1 million in scholarship funds to gentlemen that have left George Junior Republic. And it's really a tiered scholarship program. So if you graduate from George Junior Republic, first semester we'll give you X, second semester if you're successful you get Y, advancing, and some guys have left and gone off for a doctorate degree. But anyway, Nanny Jean really left a special place in our hearts for all she did. She served on our board of directors forever. And Nanny would always share the story with me. As she was a young lady, her family on Sundays, they'd ride around campus. So I just wanted to point out Nanny and her legacy that she left for us. So once a year, our scholarship committee meets. Many of you probably know Mrs. Turner, who was a long-time Grove City School District employee that worked on campus. And I apologize for that. But anyway, we meet once a year. So moving forward in our story, in 1992 we opened a adventure-based counseling program, and I apologize, I don't know what's happening, but an adventure-based counseling program, and this is a place, again, if you want to come to campus, it looks like a giant barn, but there's all these different level of ropes, and the boys learn how to climb, and ballet learn to climb walls, etc. So that opened. And the thought was that the more activities we can provide, the more we can tie the activities with treatment, the better off our young men will become over the course of time. And that's the building that the Adventure-Based Counseling Center's in. As I mentioned, it looks like a big barn. It's a giant building. And that's just a little bit more of the inside of the building. And there's the guys climbing. So that goes all the way up to the peak of the roof. If anyone wants to try it, you just let me know. In 1993, so this is, I'm going to share with you a few things that many people do not realize. So in 1993, there became a greater need for community-based services. So George Junior Republic established preventative aftercare and George Junior Republic in Indiana. So many people don't know this, but we have community-based staff members that go into homes across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and across the state of Indiana. So in those two programs, in preventative aftercare, which is in Ohio and Pennsylvania, we serve about 1,500 families a day. In the state of Indiana, we probably serve 1,600 families a day. Most people don't realize that. So the community-based workers go out, and if you think of all the social problems that we're experiencing in the world, the workers that go into those communities are really working with those families to try and maintain that family unit. Unfortunately, and I visited India, last time I visited Indiana before my most recent visit was many years ago, and what do you know Indiana for? Farming. Indiana has a terrible crystal methamphetamine problem that's devastating families. So much of the work that we do across the state of Indiana deals with the drug abusing population. In Pennsylvania and Ohio, through the preventative aftercare program, it's really reintegrating families, teaching parenting classes, dealing with very young mothers to make sure that they can help their child. So I wanted to make you aware of that. In 1988, we built an infirmary, and when I started George Junior, people kept mentioning this infirmary. That's old nomenclature. What's an infirmary? I'm picturing, a nurse in a white dress and the white hat. But we still have an infirmary on campus. We're about to make some changes there. And then in 2004, George Junior Republic decided we would self-fund our insurance, and we opened the risk retention group. So this is just a picture of, we have one group home in Indiana. Looks like the group homes we have on our campus. It looked like the Zeta house that was downtown. And then moving along. So in 2009, we celebrated our 100 years. This year is 110 years, so we're going to have some events for staff on the third week of July. I mentioned the Maurice Coho Academic Center. I mentioned that we did some renovation at the Career and Technical Center. Currently, these are the skilled trade programs, and we do bring in outside certifiers to certify our youth that walk through that program. Many of you know we had an equestrian program for years and years and years. Unfortunately, that equestrian program cost us about $300,000 a year to manage, and it wasn't sustaining. There's no way that we could recoup money for that. I apologize for my slides. But so with that, we decided that we would transition from the equestrian program, have more sports-like activities for the young men. Whether we'll bring back an equestrian program in the future, I don't know, but I know the kids that participated in that really enjoyed working with the horses. So the changing population. So I don't know how much you follow juvenile justice, but there's really a push to keep youth that are troubled, I'll just call them quote unquote troubled, with their families. So that brings a change to the work that we do. And then at the same time, because of drug addiction, because of poverty and all of these other things, there's an increased rise in children that are in the foster care system, as well as children that have experienced abuse and neglect. So we are actually seeing this trend right now where we have fewer children that have been involved on the juvenile justice for committing crimes, and more that are involved because they may have gotten in trouble, but they have no one to call, no home to call their own, I'll just say. So it's interesting how things are changing when you look back to our history, and William Reuben George was really taking these children off the streets and out of the slums, and in some ways I think there's a little bit of similarity to what we're seeing now. In addition to that, many people do not know we have an increasing population of very young children. We have children as young as 8 on our campus now. That population is growing. And many of those children, because of a neglect, they're just about this big, and it's just sad to see. A lot of trauma that the kids have experienced. A lot of parents that are that have been incarcerated, that have other issues, and that's why our population, that's driving a change in our population as well. So I know, I would assume, many individuals in this room know Mr. Rick Lasasso. So Rick was at George Junior forever and a day, 42 years. So when I was interviewed at George Junior, I'm like, how long have you been here, right? Like, oh, I started when I was 18. Now that's unheard of in today, but Rick just retired, so we miss him. But then we have a new CEO, which is Nate Gressel. And I think there's going to be a lot of services change. I know you will see us more out in the community. I know we're looking at doing more for the community, having some United Way events and different things that I'm working on actively right now. So I won't go too much into this, but there is a bit of a changing, the change of the guard and a little bit of a change of our direction here as well. So highlights. I don't want to go through. So we do try and give back to the community. The Empty Bowls, we work with the Methodist Church here in town, and we have a soup and bread line every year. Donate money back to the Grove City Community Food Pantry. Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, so Antoine Fisher, you may or may not know the name Antoine Fisher, but Antoine Fisher is well known in the community that is Los Angeles. And so Antoine Fisher was, he's a movie producer, movie writer, but he was also a youth at George Junior Republic. So we have his artwork there. And I called probably 3 years ago. Rick had given me his email address. I emailed him, and then I had a follow-up discussion with him to see if he could come to Grove City. People would love to meet you, hear your story. It was about $30,000 to bring him here. For that reason, he did not come back. But we have some of his books that he wrote, so I wanted to bring up Antoine Fisher. Maybe someday he'll feel generous and come. So Antoine Fisher wrote this book about his experience. And his book is called Finding Fish. I have a few copies at George Junior Republic if anyone wants to borrow.
There was a movie.
Yeah, there was a movie about him as well. Yeah.
It already changed.
Oh, goodness. Sorry about that. Sorry. All right. So we participate in the Read Across America program. I don't know how many people know Cindy Filson, who was a longtime teacher at George Junior Republic, and she retired last year, but she really spearheaded that. I'm just going to continue on. Campus, we have a career day where we have speakers from the outside come in and talk to our guys about career opportunities. Everyone knows about the mural in downtown. I'm sure many of you know Joseph D. Monteleone, a strong figure here in the local community. Everyone knows basketball, so I think basketball is interesting. I think at one point in time, that's all we were known for is our basketball team. So depending on who I'm speaking with. Graduates, our graduation this year is May 30th, and every year we have about 40 to 50 young men graduate or receive their GED. Many of these guys, they're the first person in their family to have received a high school diploma, and in this day and age, that's a sad state of affairs. Of course, our youth participate in track and field and different things. The reality tours out of Butler, we have 3 specialized drug and alcohol programs. Unfortunately, we have a increased rate of youth that have drug and alcohol programs. Our guys go out and talk in the communities. The sculpture program, the sculptures in town are coming back to George Junior to be repainted. I wanted to make mention of that so that everyone's aware of that. Of course, we work with the Rotary and the Memorial Gardens, and then the young men work throughout the community in various projects working here. They've done some pointing work, masonry pointing work at some of the buildings. So in terms of our future, really some changes. We know we're going to have a more integrated approach between behavioral and physical health. That infirmary nomenclature will be going away as we open a new wellness center. We're building a playground on our campus, so that's exciting. We don't have a playground on our campus, and you would think you serve all these kids, why don't you have a playground? And then we have other things that we're very much involved in. We have our young guys through the Barge program go down to the City Rescue Mission once a week and feed the individuals there that receive services. We're now partnered with the Methodist Church in Jackson Center, Pennsylvania. They make mats for the homeless, so we have Barge working to make these mats out of plastic bags for the homeless. Very interesting. And so I won't go too much into that. So I wanted to go through, I think I'm about out of time. Okay, so let me go through what I brought to share with you. So it's interesting as we go back through our archives. So this is from September 1912, and this is maybe something we could give to the Historical Society. But the Pioneer Citizen, it's interesting when you read how our worlds change. So a helpful hint, a little sunshine set aside for a rainy day is better than an umbrella. So any helpful hints? If you're having a bad day, maybe you want to open this up and read. And then there's some of our sponsors, and then some more sponsors. So this is interesting. Some of our old newspapers. The original newspaper from when George Jr. was established in 1909, I did give to Cornell University because I was worried. These, and I can pass these to you, we were just worried how would you maintain them. So let's go back here. So in 1969, had the students that were on the honor roll, just all the activities of the day. The doctor would write, the psychiatrist would write an article from the couch so you could read and get his insight in terms of his psychiatry. So you can definitely just take a look at what was happening then. In 1974, in February, talks about what happened to William Gladden, and then in memoriam, and then interesting on the back of all the sponsors that were part of this publication. I can't imagine at that time how much this cost. And then I think this was interesting in March 1974. Whether you're spiritual, religious, or not, I thought this was interesting because it talks about our Easter season, right? So, and what's happening, what was happening during that time must have been right around the Easter holiday. So just very interesting in how times have changed. In addition to that, the George Jr. Republic has always had a publication called, once we transitioned from the Republic Citizen to what was named the Identity. So I brought some of our many identities, and they used to be more of a newsletter, and then when I started George Jr. Republic, I wanted to establish more of a magazine look to it, so this is our latest edition. But then we also have a publication that goes out for our friends out in Indiana as well, because we have about 50 plus staff members out there, just to keep them informed. But all of these things are written out of here locally. Our students used to receive, letters for their Letterman jacket. We no longer have Letterman jackets, but we have a slew of letters in the basement, and there's writing on the back of this one. I don't know what it says, but so letters, if they were involved in student council or any good deeds that they did, they would probably wear their Letterman jacket. This book was written by Walm Brown, and Walm was very much moved by Mr. Gladden and all of his teaching. And Walm was a troubled youth, I would say, but he went on to earn a PhD, and I forget at this point what it was in, but I did contact Mr. Brown to learn more about his story, but he told me that he was just so impacted by what he learned at George Junior Republic and the Gladdens, that he actually established his own scholarship in recognition of the Gladdens, and he divvies out money every year for students in his hometown based on Mr. Gladden. We have several pictures that look like this in our basement, and but here's a graduating class back in from 1961, 1962. There's not many students there, but some of our early graduates. It would be interesting if we could track these young people down. But we have these for years and years and years, just old pictures with some names, and unfortunately I don't recognize the names. And this looked like an official picture. And there again, there's names on it. I could pass it, or you could come up and take a look. Maybe there's some folks that you recognize. I don't think this picture is that old, but there again, lots of pictures. We have so many pictures on campus, and as people retire and leave, many of the pictures don't have names on them. So it's really sad in terms of the history of the Junior Republic, what's happened to these individuals. The one thing I will say about George Junior Republic, I used to work at a university and I came to George Junior Republic, is because we have this great mission to help kids, and I think that mission remains whether you look favorably on children or not, and the issues that they bring. Someone needs to take care of the children across the United States that really come from backgrounds that we're so blessed that we didn't experience those challenges. Again, I would encourage you, if you're interested in a tour, let Skip know or call me at George Junior Republic. I'd be happy to take you on a tour. And then if you want to come out and visit our history room, if the group wants to come out and visit the history room, I'd be happy to share that with you. And as I mentioned, we had these old movie reels. They were about this big, these movie reels. And come to pass, I found out that Sam's Club, you can take old movie reels to Sam's Club and they'll reproduce them for you. So we had these old movie reels, and I had 3 movies reproduced, and they're very interesting to watch. So if the group wants to come, you could come and tour the history room, and I could share the movies with you. We could put it on the big screen. Just very, and most of the movies, like one of the movies, I should say, William Gladden, he keeps asking for money over and over, so I don't know if it was supposed to be like a marketing piece. I don't know, because there's this beautiful footage, and then he says, won't you help the boys at George Junior? He keeps saying it, so I don't know. Apparently in a good message, so I'm assuming people send in money. But if you're ever interested in that, definitely let me know. Any questions?
Okay, thank you, Susan.
Thank you. If you want to take a look at these things and Skip, I'd be happy to give some of these things to the Historical Society, or if anyone has a vested interest in history and likes to go through boxes, just let me know. We have several boxes I'd be happy to give you.
The papers, we will keep those in acid-free containers, right?
Well, paper like that is, we might. We don't have, I'm not sure which container you're thinking about.
in folders.
We don't have acid-free folders. We have those
okay.
little sleeves, and we have
okay.
acid-free boxes. But
Okay.
we don't have something especially like that, and we don't keep newspaper generally just because it's so fragile and disintegrating.
Right.
But we might
Okay.
try to
And
find, we can certainly find folders.
Okay. And even if you would find folders, I think we could probably pay for the folders, just because I hate to leave these things just sitting around.
You don't have a library or something.
No, we have a history room, but there's so much history. We have boxes of history, so it's nice to keep some of the things at least where we know it'll be safe. Because like everything else, people come and go, and then we don't have an archivist. Frankly, I wish we did. So.
Well, anything you want to share, put aside, and
Okay.
we'll gladly accept it.
Okay.
Now, we do have a display case up here with several things from the George Junior, some artifacts that we do have here in the Historical Society Museum. And then we also have 3 big scrapbooks. And I put those on the table in the library, so feel free to go out and look at those. Some of the things that you have, we have too.
Yeah, which is
But we'll always consider additional donations. There's also a small photo album out there of pictures of buildings on campus. So be sure to check those out as well this evening.
So one thing I will share before I leave, but one thing that's important is so many individuals have said to me, I remember George Jr. at Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
Bring back the Christmas lights.
Yeah.
So I'm working on it. Because so many people remember driving through campus and looking at Christmas lights, and that's all I've heard for like 5.5 years. So we're really working on it, and I think in some ways those days have gone by the wayside for many communities, that there's not a nice Christmas display. Of course, the park has a Christmas display, but where the homes are lit up, and maybe we can make it into a competition. I know there for a while when Rick was at George Jr., I'm like, we need to bring back the Christmas display, but we were just funded to look at our energy costs, so that probably wouldn't have been a good idea, but those days are gone. So just be aware that that's something you'll probably be seeing around Christmas time again.
I think Georgie Hodge has some of the original displays that
She
you
puts them
had.
out in the park. I grew up on 58 just out past the George Jr. and we always heard that when the one barn burnt, a lot of the decorations were in there. So they were lost in that fire. I can't prove that, but that was what we always told. And one memory I have as a child living out there, you not only farmed across the street where County Market is, but there was property that the George Jr. had going towards Mercer, because the hay wagons would go past our house, and those kids would be on the wagons going, and then they'd be sitting on top of those hay bales coming back, and we'd see them going past the house all the time. So.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Wife and I raised our family at the intersection where the Chevy garage is now.
Oh.
And one of the things was that some of those boys would decide to run. And they would come to our house and they'd want directions. And they would say,
Which way to Pittsburgh?
which way to Pittsburgh? And what they wanted to do was go to Erie. But they would ask about which way to Pittsburgh, and then they'd know to go the opposite direction. In hopes that they would throw the people who was looking for them off.
Right.
We had one show up at our house one time. My brother happened to be out in the driveway washing the car, and he wanted to go to Pittsburgh, and my brother asked him if he was from the George Jr., and he said yes. And he said, well, you go through the field over here, and he told him landmarks, going through this field, and he'd eventually come to the interstate. Well, as soon as the kid is on his way, my brother calls the George Jr. and said, you got a runner, this is where he's going to come out. Go get him. And today my brother works at the George Jr.
So it's interesting because when I leave work, I make a left onto George Jr. Road, and then I make a left onto Cranberry Road because I live out towards Mercer. So God bless the people in Grove City, because every so often, and it happened last week, there's a young guy with a backpack on walking the way I'm going, and I'm thinking, I wonder if this is like a George Jr. kid, right? So of course I have to call in, right, to make certain it wasn't. This poor kid was harassed. I was trying to be a good citizen,
They used to have a reputation for maybe stealing a car. My son had our old car parked. He used to work at County Market in the deli, and he said, Mom, I don't know where to park, and I'm afraid that he just loved that car, and he's afraid one of them would love it too. So they never took it. But
One did come to visit us and borrowed our car one night.
Yeah.
One time I saw, when we lived out on the other side of the George Jr., I saw an individual, and I was sure it was a runner.
Right.
And so it was a time when it cost to make a phone call.
Oh.
And we were on the Blacktown phone line, and of course the George Jr.'s on Grove City. And I thought, well, I'm not going to spend money, so I called collect. Well, they wouldn't accept the call. Okay, we'll just let the boy run. Oh, where is he? Where is he? They took the call.
Smart. See?
Hi, my sister and I, our late father, spent his whole career at the George Jr. Republic during Mr. Tucci's time, Steve Slenchak.
He worked there from college
So
graduation to retirement.
we have a lot of stories. My Our father started as a history teacher out of college. They didn't pay anything, so he coached football at swimming pool we swam in. When he coached sports every Saturday, my mother would make big spaghetti and the two best players would come to our house. I mean, that was like rare for him. Then they needed a school guidance counselor, so he got his master's in counseling. They needed a school psychologist. He got his master's in psychology. Our uncle worked there for a short time too. We lived at George Junior.
He and Mr. Tusser in that fish book.
Yeah.
That's who Antoine Fisher talked about.
And so it was very interesting because that book had come out. Our father died in June of 2000. That book came out. My father's mentioned in there. Our father made sure through the state, because Antoine Fisher was getting released and because he was 18. So my father made him a deal. He said, "What do you like to do?" And Antoine Fisher said, "No one's ever asked me in my life what I like to do." And he said, I like art. So my dad said, "You study this morning. I'll get you the art room all afternoon." And my father made arrangements through the state of Pennsylvania to administer, because he was a psychologist, to administer his graduation test. So he left the George Junior with his
That's in the
school-
book. That's in the book.
high school diploma.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's young men that called our father till he died.
He
Through all
named the
those
sports
years.
team. They didn't have a name. He named them the Tigers. They were just called
That
George
was
Jr.
on,
Yeah,
right?
they were just called
And
George
back
Jr.
in the day, he would have started in, 61, I guess, and retired in 93. Those kids were in for auto theft, and basically because no one wanted them.
Right.
I mean, it is a whole different culture out there now.
Right.
So we grew up living the
Those are
George
all-
Jr.
And it's
life.
interesting how things have changed as well, because it would be nice, right, to have someone come over, have a young guy come to your home, but those things you can't. There's so
Right.
many laws and regulations now, even patting someone on the shoulder.
Yeah,
It's
we'd have
very
entire
much-
sports teams in the summer for picnics.
I'm sure you
Football,
would.
baseball, basketball. We'd have them all
Yeah.
over our house.
My sister was a housekeeper for Mr. Barnes for years, and she would go and do his house cleaning once a week. He lived up on North Broad Street, by where the Grove Manor is now.
Oh, okay. See, those are the things I think from the George Jr. perspective, it's interesting to know and for me to document so that it's kept.
And you said they paid for cigarettes. They might have at one time, but in the 60s and 70s, they gave them the cigarettes. It minimized problems. It minimized fighting. It minimized stealing. You got a pack of cigarettes a day.
And they were on a demerit system.
Yeah,
back then,
yeah.
Probably
You
of something
just-
similar.
they just got them.
You earned points and you didn't earn
It
points.
kept the peace.
and-
It kept the peace.
Yeah.
Morgan Barnes was the first Rotary District Governor from Grove City.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting.
Isn't his picture on the mural at the Guthrie?
Yeah, that in the Derby, the mural on the side of the Guthrie Theater building, that's Morgan Barnes. He's
Oh, okay.
depicted on there, a little bit. He has a little
Okay.
Derby hat.
Thank you, I didn't know that.
And there's lots of pictures of him up in the sports room.
And I guess the most rewarding thing is I lived away for years. I grew up here and lived away for many years. And after returning as an adult, I was speaking to my father and I said, wasn't it frustrating knowing that these kids are put in there 3 months, 6 months, a year? Their environment's already so embedded
right.
into them. I said, isn't it frustrating? How do you know that you've achieved anything when they're going back to the drug-ridden streets, the mother that doesn't care, the father is absent, and he said, if I've helped one kid, I've done my job.
And that's the way I look
And then
at it.
that book came out, not that was, because we knew.
Right.
Like I said, he had young men calling him his whole life to,
Right.
be their touchstone, but that was kind of emotional for our family.
Well, thank you, Susan. As you
Yeah.
can see, there's lots of Grove City ties. with
Yeah.
George Jr.
Yeah.
pictures.
Thank you.
These out to cookies and punch.
We just want to take pictures because our dad is 46.
mean, you got something like identity.
What kind of cookies did you make?
7 layer.